Hello everybody. This is the video for January 21st. And it'll pick up where we left off. But actually I'm going to rewind it just a little bit to where he's showing you hundreds of little red dots that indicate individual earthquakes that were detected during the Northridge earthquake. Okay, I'm going to hit play. You're going to write the notes today, continuing on where we left off yesterday.
The very strongest shaking. And Los Angeles, in this case, is off in this direction, so it did not receive the strongest shaking. The strongest shaking occurred in the mountains or in the northern part of the San Fernando Valley, but the main part of the city over here was spared from the strongest shaking. However, in the case of the Kobe earthquake, the fault went right through the city. The rupture was directed towards the city, and very heavy shaking occurred right in the city.
That's not good.
In fact, the shaking in Kobe was very comparable to the shaking in the northern part of the San Fernando Valley. So in many instances, the earthquakes had very similar ground motions, but one very major difference is there were large buildings above the Kobe earthquake that were not above the Northridge earthquake.
That's the key. So, the big difference. How come 100 times more people died in Japan, in Kobe, Japan, than Northridge? Because Northridge is a suburb, and Kobe, it's very, very closely packed, okay? So the difference is small buildings and houses. Kobe, densely packed. More people. Okay, you're done writing for a while. I'm going to hit play.
There is a saying that earthquakes do not kill people, buildings do. In Northridge, disaster struck one of the few large complexes that had been built there.
Pay attention.
Northridge Meadows was a three-story apartment complex.
A three-story apartment complex. See a problem here? I only see 2 stories. Yeah, the first floor is compacted lower than the desks in my room. And this happened at night, so the people are in their beds. Many of them are dead. Okay? This was a big apartment complex. We have apartment complexes like that around Albert Lee. Most of them are like 2 stories.
The first floor collapsed and the second floor pancaked onto the ground. 16 people died here. But there were survivors.
Wait a minute. Hold on. You underneath that? Okay, right underneath there.
And I went to sit up to get up, and I realized the ceiling was on my head.
I climbed down the balcony. I grabbed my wife, ran like heck to the center of the complex.
And I was wedged between my mattress and the wall. And the mattress was up in the air, and I couldn't figure out what it was doing there, why I couldn't push it back down.
I was thrown around on my bed. The lights went out. It was black. It was so dark. I was very frightened. I thought hell had opened up and came to take me. I was convinced that I was going to die.
All right, pay attention. Look at this door.
This was only one suburb.
Now, I watched this video for like 20 years till I figured out something. Okay? I'm going to try to back it up so you can see that again. I wondered why they spray painted the room number on the door again, because the metal numbers are right there. They wrote something on the door. I'm gonna back it up. I don't know how well this is gonna back up. Back up.
And it required
Okay, I'm gonna play it again. See if you can figure out what's written on the door. It only took me 20 years.
This was only one suburban building, and it required.
I thought that said 208. Did you see what it really said? It said 2DB. Anybody want to guess what that is? 2DB. 2 dead bodies. Okay? Why would they write that on a door? So they can go, they're doing a search for the living. Okay? So they write on every door to tell somebody else that we've already searched here. If you see DB, that means they have to come back and take somebody out who's passed away. Okay? The search and rescuers did that so they don't waste time searching in a room that's already been searched. Their top priority is finding people that need help that are alive.
Major rescue operation. One of the rescuers also visited Kobe and was able to make alarming comparisons with Los Angeles.
In Kobe and Northridge earthquakes both, we were very lucky in that the quakes occurred in early morning hours before people were in the office buildings and schools and commercial buildings. That saved a lot of lives right there. We have to consider that in Los Angeles and the United States.
You're safer in a house than in a big building.
They had large commercial buildings, government buildings.
Right on the intersection.
Collapse completely into the street or collapse 2 or 3 floors in the midsection. The same thing could happen here in Los Angeles County. A midday earthquake with people in those kind of buildings working, we're going to be faced with many, many live people trapped in massive building collapses.
This whole building in Kobe, made of concrete, collapsed backwards like a house of cards. There are plenty of buildings like this in Los Angeles. As at Northridge Meadows, Kobe rescuers found themselves searching under buildings that had simply pancaked. Usually it was caused by the failure of the first floor. Buildings just knelt on the ground. The problem was open spaces. Hotel lobbies, restaurants, shop fronts with wide space for displays, and especially buildings with garages underneath. Often there would be a soft story halfway up the building. In this one, the third story has pancaked.
All right, now you get a story from Mr. Fiscus. My wife and I had to drive to Chicago one time to do some paperwork for the adoption of our daughter. I'd never been in Chicago before, and driving there was a mistake, okay? Let me tell you what a big city is. Okay, this is a redneck definition of a big city. It's where millions of people all decided they wanted to live together, okay? And in a big city, there's very little parking, okay? Unlike Albert Lee, where everybody can park practically anywhere, and you can have an unlimited number of vehicles, okay? In a city, it doesn't work that way. You can't park millions of cars wherever you feel like it. So parking is very, very limited. We drove around the building that we were trying to get to for this appointment in Chicago for half an hour. We couldn't find a parking space. We eventually found a parking garage several blocks away, and we paid $35 for 1 hour of parking. It's that much in demand. Now, the reason I'm telling you that is, in a big city like Kobe, they'll park underneath the buildings. On the first floor, they'll have parking garages. That made the buildings weak. All right, I'm going to hit play again.
A whole building has
If you lived on that building's third floor, you're probably dead.
Shaking in an earthquake, it can crack like a wine glass and collapse.
And you're not going to be able to go up the stairs of the elevator above it.
In such collapses, there are few survivors. In Kobe, people live and work close together. It is densely populated, unlike Northridge, but not so different from cities like Los Angeles.
We're looking at a map of the Los Angeles region, which is centered on the San Fernando Valley, this large urbanized area here. In the case of the Northridge earthquake, the earthquake actually broke to the north so that the strong shaking was directed away from the city into these relatively lightly populated areas to the north of Los Angeles. So let's now take a look at the Kobe area, and we're looking at a map that is on the same scale as the Los Angeles map. One difference you can see immediately is that the area that's urbanized is very small by comparison.
Hitting pause.
People live in this little corridor.
All right. Kobe is a very narrow city wedged up against the mountains, trapped by the ocean and the mountains. It's very much shaped like Duluth, if you've ever been to Duluth, where the people live right by the water or on the side of the hill, okay? Also, notice those weird shaped islands. See those? Those are man-made islands for shipping great big freight boats. Everybody in America has gotten stuff that came from those freight docks. Okay, Kobe is Japan's #1 shipping port. Okay, you're gonna see those docks later. This is where they load the great big containers on the ships, full of TVs and iPhones and that kind of stuff.
So the density of housing was much higher. There were many more opportunities for the earthquake to knock buildings down.
But Kobe showed that it is possible to build for earthquake protection. This market was still operating during the day of the quake, feeding the homeless survivors. While all around it was in ruins, it sustained only light damage.
We knew the foundation of this area was not firm, so we put many piles underneath to secure the building and the arcade. We made it 2 or 3 times stronger than normal. This earthquake proved our decision was right. Now we shop owners and residents are glad of our decision at that time.
We know how to build buildings well enough now. We're beginning to understand how to identify the areas that are most likely going to be damaged by earthquakes in the future. If we apply those building standards in the areas where they're needed, we should be able to survive most earthquakes without loss of life.
With older buildings, reinforcement with steel is enough to withstand most earthquakes. New buildings are already constructed to the latest earthquake codes.
You want a good job that pays good money? Be a welder. There's always going to be a demand for welders, men and women, big people and little people. Sometimes if you're small, you can get into places that a big person can't, okay? Places that decide they have to get ready for earthquakes will hire people to crawl into existing tight spaces and weld in steel reinforcement so that the building is stronger. Okay? Just put that idea in the back of your head. If you want a career where you can make good money, travel the world if you want, and help people.
The lesson from Kobe is clear. Strong or reinforced buildings are less likely to kill. But it was not just buildings that fell down.
This is awesome.
One of the astonishing television images was the sight of the Hanshin Expressway lying on its side.
It didn't work.
The collapse took its toll.
Imagine if that would have hit during rush hour.
Some survived.
It was much scarier to see the road.
This guy's hilarious.
Feel the ground shaking. I thought the quake was over. But then I felt as if my body was being pushed into the ground. 2 or 3 seconds later, I heard a huge bang. Then it was all over.
And this guy, look at this bus driver.
In a ski tour bus.
Look at where it stopped. Look at where it stopped.
I was driving the tour bus filled with passengers. I felt I must stop. I shut my eyes after we stopped. When I opened them again, the highway had just fallen away in front of us.
I would have peed my
The bus
pants.
was swinging over the edge,
1 second farther wrong, they would have all died.
To safety.
That's snow on top of the roof. This is in LA. Check this out.
After Northridge, 11 freeways came down all over Los Angeles. Significantly, it was only those that had not been strengthened for earthquakes that fell. In Kobe, it was the same. Concrete shattered, but only on those pillars that had not been fitted with a full metal jacket.
Steel saved
Another
it.
clear message from both quakes. In the future, no freeway bridge should fall.
Wrap them in steel.
Most of Kobe's modern bridges stood up to the intense shaking, but the docks were almost completely destroyed. Kobe was the biggest port in Japan, with over 200 wharves handling most of Japan's export trade. The earthquake of January 17th left them with just 3.
Those big blue things are the cranes that pick up the truck boxes and put them in the cargo ships.
The stoppage affected the whole Japanese economy, as well as the U.S. computer industry and Boeing in Seattle. Japan's lost shipping trade was quickly picked up by Taiwan and Korea.
Another cause of the damage was the types of soils that the city is built on. They're somewhat softer than those in Northridge, and in particular some of the made-land areas in the port are places where liquefaction happened. The ground was actually shaken so hard that it flowed, and that was the major contributor to the serious economic damage in the port areas.
Soft soil actually amplifies shock waves. It makes the ground movement larger than it would be on hard soil. Tests have shown that soil becomes like a thick liquid when it's vibrated. Water, which is thinner and lighter, rises to the top. Anything heavy either sinks immediately or floats about before sinking more slowly like a waterlogged boat. This liquefaction is exactly what happened to the Kobe docks. As soon as the
That's not rain. That came out of the ground.
solidified, but the damage was done. Even in these extreme conditions, some dockside high-rises survived remarkably well with only slight damage. The reason is that their foundations were long and deep, reaching down to the bedrock below. Kobe's port is being reconstructed as quickly as possible. Japan cannot afford to have this happen again. The soil is being compacted firmly, and the new foundations are going all the way down to solid rock. Further along the harbor, a bridge was being built to the offshore island of Awaji. The epicenter of the quake was directly under the bridge. It didn't fall, but the ground moved so much that the whole island has shifted slightly, away from the mainland. The bridge will now have to be 1 meter longer. Teacher Makiko Yoshihara lives near the bridge.
Despite the fact that we live close to Awaji Island, where the epicenter was, we didn't suffer as much damage as the Hyogo Prefecture or Nagata. It was terrible there.
This curious anomaly illustrates an effect that has been puzzling seismologists. When Makiko got to her school, she was happy to find it still standing, though considerably damaged. But the area next to it had been devastated.
Some of her little kids died.
Different parts of Kobe suffered different levels of earth shaking. Why was one area shaken into ruins and another left standing? A Japanese seismologist, Professor Irakura, has a theory that would explain the mystery. It concerns the waves that flow out in all directions from the epicenter.
A geographical description of Kobe is that there are mountains on the northern side and a sedimentary basin to the south. It is rather like this pond and the banks surrounding it. The basin contains alluvium, very soft soil, which is like the water in the pond. When the waves from the earthquake reach the edge of the basin, they ripple back, making new waves going in a different direction. We call them Banshi Sesiha, or basin-originated waves.
We're almost done.
Waves flowing through the sedimentary soil in the basin are reflected back off the sides. Where they intersect with other waves, they increase the surface movements in irregular patterns of peaks and troughs. Kobe lies in a thin strip of land enclosed by the mountains and the sea. Earthquake waves bouncing off the mountains met the incoming waves and created peaks of damage scattered through the city. Large modern cities can be struck down in a matter of seconds. This could be Los Angeles, San Francisco, Tokyo, or any city close to a plate boundary. On the night of the quake, 300,000 people became homeless, in addition to the 5,400 who died. 180,000 buildings were destroyed. 1 million people were without food and without water. The cost in cash
See that?
was $147 billion.
Having to use water from the street.
The problem cannot
Check out these railroad tracks. You can't use them. They got bent by the earthquake.
Tokyo has been preparing for years. This is where the next major urban earthquake was expected, not Kobe. 12 million people live in Tokyo compared to Kobe's 1.5. Tokyo Metropolitan Government has a permanent staff on standby. They are trained and equipped to respond rapidly in an earthquake. One lesson learned from Kobe was that emergency supplies cannot be stored centrally. They simply won't get through. From now on, emergency rations will be stored in all schools and community centers throughout Japan. And local emergency water supplies are being reorganized so that they will never run out again. The new philosophy being applied by planners, builders, and rescue services is that an earthquake need not be a disaster. Crucial to this effort will be the work of seismologists.
All right, this is the last part, and it's the best part.
Museum, Tokyo residents can experience an earthquake themselves.
Tokyo Science Museum. They're gonna shake them.
Into rooms which are programmed to reflect the seismic waves of earthquakes. They experience the vertical jolting first.
Okay, pay attention. The first waves show up.
Or P wave. Then come the big horizontal secondary or S waves.
Watch their faces when it quits shaking. Watch their faces.
The shaking lasts as long as Kobe did. Knowing what it...
Now, they went into there knowing there was going to be an earthquake. They volunteered. Okay? Imagine how scary that would be if you didn't know it was going to happen. Okay? I don't know about your house, but none of my furniture is bolted down to the floor. This thing, everything there is bolted down so people can hang on. Okay? And they're safe. Nothing's going to fall on them. Those were fake books on the bookshelf. They didn't have anything fall. Okay? So they can program this shaker house to shake just like the earthquake did. The first thing that hit was the things called primary waves. A short vertical jolt. That's what woke up Mr. Futon. And then the big sideways waves hit that do all the damage. Okay? I'd like you to watch that again, and then we'll end.
through an earthquake.
Okay, get ready. Okay, get ready. Watch the primary waves hit first.
They experience the vertical jolting first.
Here it comes.
This is the primary or P wave. Then come the big horizontal secondary or S waves.
Nothing's breaking. No pipes are breaking. There's no water on the floor. Unless somebody pees their pants.
Shaking lasts as long as Kobe did.
All right.
Knowing
Here's the last thing of the day. And I'm watching the clock. We're already at 26 minutes about. Okay. So, 3 kinds of earthquake waves. This is super important. Primary, which means they show up first. Everybody just calls them P waves. Not waves of P. P waves, primary. Okay? They're the fastest, the first ones. Then the next ones are called secondary waves. They're called S waves. Okay? And the last ones, this one doesn't make any sense to most people. They're called surface waves. Okay? They're the slowest, the ones that show up the last. And you can't use S because S has already been used. Okay? Surface waves. These are called L waves. You're like, L? What? That doesn't make any sense. It stands for longitudinal, AKA, which means sideways. Longitudinal. Okay? Now, we're going to talk a lot more about these. Primary, secondary, and surface. The primary waves don't do much damage. They just give you an advance warning. Get ready, here comes an earthquake. And then, wham, the big stuff shows up. Okay? Remember the convenience store where the guy handed back the change to the customer, and right then they felt a P wave. And then, what was that? And then they knew, because the secondary wave showed up and trashed the place. All right, that was 27 and a half minutes.